Good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me and hopefully it's not too wet wherever you may be in the world. Welcome to our fourth webinar that we're doing here at OTB Legal. This one is specifically aimed at HR professionals, aiming to give you an overview on how you can help your clients attract and recruit international talent from around the world. My name is Marcus Worthington. I'm the Operations Director here at OTB Legal. I'm the non-legal person here on the panel today. So I'll be asking questions of our legal experts here to kind of try and give an operational viewpoint. Part of my role is to kind of manage HR, and as HR professionals, you'll know that that can be quite difficult sometimes. But we're going to talk you through the steps that you need to take to apply for a sponsor license and then the subsequent skilled worker visa to attract that international talent. We are aware that immigration law can be complex, but hopefully from the overview that we give you today, you'll be able to walk away with a much clearer path about whether this is a route that's open to you, or whether it's something that you wish to proceed with. This is going to be a deliberately kind of fairly light touch overview on the processes. If you want to take a deeper dive into this, there's a few options open to you. We have 3 of the webinars that are on our website, so I'd certainly advise you to have a look there. We can, after the meetings, have free one-to-one consultations with anybody to talk through in more detail with you about what you may wish to do and what the routes forward are for you. But we will also be sending a copy of the slides out. We're sending out a copy of the recordings. And yeah, just basically, if you want to kind of get in touch with us for a chat, we're here. That's what we're here for. Okay. We will be having, after the kind of formal presentation of the webinar, we'll be having a question and answer session. So if you do have any questions that pop up throughout the presentation, stick them in the question and answer. We'll answer them at the end. We do have over 100 people who have signed up for this event today, so we may not be able to get through all of them, but our plan is to kind of summarise as much as we can. And if there are really detailed questions, we may get in contact with you outside of the webinar if that's okay. Yeah, we'll do our best to kind of move this forward. So kind of enough from me. Let's kind of introduce you to the 2 stars of the show, really. We're very lucky to have 2 of the leading lights in the world of business immigration law here today. So Kate and Lydia, would you like to introduce yourselves?
My name is Lydia Watkinson. I am an associate solicitor in the business immigration team at OTB Legal. I've been advising on business immigration for about 8 years now. Before that, I used to advise on employment law.
And hi everyone, thanks so much for joining us. My name is Kate Gamester. I'm also an associate solicitor at OTB. I'm a relatively new joiner, but overall I've got over 10 years experience in immigration. So it's nice to thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you for being here. To start us off then, Kate, if a company wants to start employing staff from outside the UK, what are the first steps that they need to take?
Yeah, so I think as a starting point, they are going to need what's called a sponsor license, and that's what we're going to be covering today. What is a sponsor license? How does a company get one? Who's eligible? And then we're going to look at the sort of more sort of technical aspects of the visa application process. But yeah, to employ, the main route for employment in the UK is this process of sponsorship, for which the employer needs a sponsor license in place first. Within the sponsor license, there's 2 main work categories. The first is called the skilled worker route. Previously, it used to be called Tier 2 General. For those who've sort of been involved in immigration prior to Brexit, after Brexit, there was a few changes to the system. And then we've got the Global Business Mobility Senior Specialist Worker, which is a bit of a mouthful route, which that's the intercompany transfer route. So it used to be called Tier 2 ICT. And just to talk about that route first, that's for existing overseas employees who are working for a linked overseas entity. They can come in for short-term transfers relatively easily. There's no English language requirement, which is a positive aspect of that category. But the main downside is it doesn't provide a route to permanent residency. And in practice, it's not as used as much as it was. The skilled worker route is typically for new hires, but it can be for existing overseas employees. And the key point is this does provide a route to permanent residency after 5 years. Migrants can bring their families as a spouse, unmarried partner, children under 18. It does carry an English language requirement though, so if you've got someone who's struggling a bit with English language, obviously they need to be an overseas employee, then you've got the other route that you can consider. And those are essentially the two main work routes that you'll be sort of working with once the sponsor license is in place.
Okay, that's great, thank you. So the starting point is for a company to apply for a sponsor license. Can you give us more detail on kind of what's involved in that process?
Yeah, so a sponsor license, once it's in place, effectively grants the holder permission to employ overseas workers, including obviously Europeans now post-Brexit. It also gives them the authorization to sponsor certain people in the UK who are on a different visa or perhaps on a skilled worker visa for a competitor. So it's that approval to effectively employ overseas workers. I mean, currently there's over 80,000 companies on the list who hold a license, and it's growing vastly by the day. Once the license is in place, a sponsor can then go in and assign what's called a certificate of sponsorship to the person that it wants to sponsor, i.e. employ. That's often called a COS, if you hear that sort of term, and then that's essentially a work authorization document. It's electronic. The individual that you want to sponsor requires that COS, that electronic work authorization, to then go and make their visa application, and it's essentially a sign, an indication that they have a confirmed job offer from a licensed sponsor, and as part of assigning that certificate, the sponsor makes a pledge that it accepts all its duties associated with sponsorship, which we'll go into, and also a pledge that the role is skilled enough and that the individual will be paid enough, again, that we're going to touch on more. And as I said, once the individual has that certificate of sponsorship, which is mandatory for the visa, they then make their visa application either from their home country if they're overseas, or from within the UK if they're in a category that's eligible to allow them to switch.
Okay, that's great, thank you. So turning to you now, Lydia, what's the application process? Maybe people out there thinking, okay, yeah, I may want to do this. What's involved?
Okay, so there are two key aspects to your sponsor license application. There's an online form that you have to complete and obviously provide some information about your organisation. And you also have quite a lot of additional documentation that you have to provide to the Home Office. When the Home Office are looking at an application, they typically want to see that, first of all, you're a genuine trading organisation, and that you're operating lawfully in the UK. So if you need a particular registration or something like that, that you've got it. They also want to see that you're going to have the necessary sort of HR processes and other sort of administrative wherewithal, really, to be able to stick to your sponsor duties and the additional obligations that puts on you, and that you're going to have what's called a genuine vacancy to offer. So that means that you have an actual need for a sponsor license. You're going to actually need to sponsor workers. In terms of submitting the application itself, when you do that, you're going to need to name 3 key personnel on that license. They are the authorising officer. So that's usually a very senior member of management. It should normally be the most senior person in the organisation with responsibility for recruitment. And they are the person who holds ultimate responsibility for the licence. They're responsible for everything that's done on the licence on behalf of the organisation. The second one is the key contact, which pretty much does what it says on the tin. So that's the person that the Home Office will get in touch with if they want to come and visit you or if they need any extra information from you. The third one is called a level 1 user. So that is a person who actually gets a login to the sponsorship management system to take sort of administrative actions on the license, such as assigning a certificate of sponsorship, as Kate was talking about. Although there are 3 roles that need to be filled, you can actually have one person wearing all three hats if you want to, and quite often when we do an initial license, that's the case. We would always suggest that once your license is granted, you add a second level 1 user. That is because the login that is given to a level 1 user is unique to them and it must not be shared. It's not a Netflix password. The reason for it is that the Home Office perform background checks on all of the people involved in the license. And so for obvious reasons, if they've done a background check on one person, they don't want them then sharing their password with other people. Other things to be aware of with your key personnel is that they must be based in the UK for the duration of the time that they are filling that role on the license. The authorising officer must be an employee or officer of the company, so that could be an officer as a director, for example. The other 2 roles, key contact and level 1 user, if you have a named legal representative, then we can fill that role on your behalf if you want to. Once you've got your form filled in and you've collected all your documents together, you submit the application online. There is always a fee to pay to the Home Office. So you pay that fee as part of the submission process, and then we just email all of the documents that we've got together to the Home Office for them to consider.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Okay, so how long does the application process for a sponsor license take?
So, as Lydia explained, there's certain key mandatory supporting documents. So it depends a lot on how quickly the required documents and information can be gathered. But from the date that the documents are submitted to the Home Office, current service standards are 8 weeks from receipt of those documents. It can take longer if the Home Office decides to do what's called a pre-license visit, and that's where they elect to go to the address listed on the application. Usually they would give notice that they're planning to do the visit, and they would sort of have a look to check that a company has effective systems in place. Obviously, the more established a company, the more longer it's been trading, the less likely in practice that's going to happen. But typically 8 weeks processing time. There is a priority service, which means an application can go through in 10 business days. But unfortunately, at the moment, there's slots for that. There's a limited number of slots per day, and demand is really high. So if we're unable to get the priority slot, then it's 8 weeks.
Okay, thank you. So people maybe watching this at home thinking, okay, this sounds expensive. Are there any costs involved? So
it actually, the cost of a sponsor license application isn't actually as much as perhaps you would think, given it grants you the ability to sponsor overseas workers. It actually depends on the size of the company, whether it's considered a small or large company, or whether it's a registered charity. The application fee is less for charities and small companies, and how they take the definition of a small company comes from the Companies Act. And at least 2 of the following need to apply: annual turnover of 10.2 million or less, total assets 5.1 million or less, or 50 employees or fewer. So 2 of those 3, and then if a company does fall within the small company regime, the application fee is 536, so not significant, and the cost for a large sponsor is 1,476. And once granted, a license is in place for 4 years for everybody, at which point you have to renew it and pay the similar fee. And actually, we talked about assigning a certificate of sponsorship, and that's not that expensive either. That's currently £239.
Okay, thank you. So can any company apply for a sponsor license, or are there limits?
So as I think we've touched upon, certain mandatory documents need to be in place. Company needs to be a genuine employer and have a genuine need to sponsor a worker in a genuine vacancy. But provided all those things are in place, and also that the salary on offer to the individual meets the requirements, which we're going to go into, and also that the role is sufficiently skilled, then it is open to any company to apply. Just to add though, that individuals are not allowed to hold sponsor licenses. There's one exception to that, and that's sole traders who are permitted to sponsor someone to work within their own business.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so Kate, you've dealt with a huge number of sponsor license applications. What are the most common problems that you encounter when applying for them?
So as Lydia mentioned about the positions of key personnel, so there is actually also an additional requirement that the first level 1 user, when you apply for your sponsor license, they need to be a settled worker, which is essentially a British person, someone with permanent residency, and actually also someone with status under the European Settlement Scheme. And in practice, that's a really problematic requirement, where you've got a company that's quite well established overseas and they're looking to come to the UK and set up. They don't really want to, they might not want to, employ someone straight away. They want to send someone who existing employee to sort of set things up. So that can be a big hurdle for established overseas companies. They have fixed it slightly. There's an expansion worker application that doesn't have that requirement, but that obviously not something we're focusing on today. And then also it can be a challenge for new startups, and that the definition, the Home Office definition of a new startup is companies that have been trading for 18 months or less. For those types of company, it's mandatory that evidence of a business bank account is submitted, and this really is problematical for new startups because it can take many months to get a bank account set up, given all the compliance requirements banks are subject to. So I think certainly in practice, those are the two key sort of areas that companies can experience problems with.
Okay, thanks. That's useful to know. So once a company gets a sponsor license, they can take on international staff the next day. Is that how it works?
Not quite, but it is quick. So the license is in place. Next, the level 1 user goes into the license and assigns a certificate of sponsorship to the individual that the company wants to sponsor, and then we're ready to reach the visa application stage, which unless they're in a category, as I said before, in the UK with permission that allows them to switch, they need to submit from their home country. And then there are certain other eligibility requirements associated with the skilled worker route. One is English language, as I mentioned earlier. Another, depending on where the individual lives, could be a TB test. What we would typically do, though, is we'd sort of work on everything in parallel. So you've got your license, we're preparing that, but we're also advising on this next step. But that's the next step, is the visa stage.
Okay, which moves us on nicely to you now, Lydia. Okay, so we've got the sponsor license in play. We're issued the certificate of sponsorship. The company then needs to apply for a skilled worker, as Kate's just said. Do you want to kind of give us more information about the application process and what's involved?
Yeah, so there are roughly sort of two slightly different processes that an employee might need to use, and the one that they need to use depends in large part on what type of immigration document they have. So for most applicants coming from overseas, they will need to complete an online form, and they will submit that form online. They will have to pay some money again to the Home Office when they do that. They will then need to make an appointment to go to a place called a visa application centre that's located somewhere near to them in their home country, and submit their biometrics. So they'll typically be asked to submit fingerprints and a facial photograph, which the Home Office use to confirm their identity. Once they've done that, they'll also be asked to upload their supporting documentation, and that all is sent to the Home Office for consideration. Increasingly for applicants who are applying in country, and also for those who hold passports issued by the EU countries, they have a slightly different process, what they have to do is they still have to fill in an online form, but they can confirm their identity using an app that the Home Office have developed called the Immigration ID Checking app. So what they have to do with that is, instead of going to that biometric appointment, they can download the app to a phone or tablet, and they will be asked to use that device to read the biometric chip that is within their immigration document. And then they will be asked to scan the document, take a photograph of themselves, and also scan their face. And that essentially checks their identity against the biometrics in their passport. So that's quite useful if employees can do that, because it just saves a bit of time. So yeah, that's the main process they're going to have to go through.
Okay, so how long does that process take?
Okay, so for those applying from inside the UK, so people who are maybe on a different visa and they're switching into skilled worker, or maybe they're working for another company and they want to come and work for you, the standard processing time is 8 weeks from the time that they submit their biometrics. For those who are coming from overseas, it's actually a little bit quicker. They will typically get a decision within 3 weeks of submitting their biometrics. For both these, there are priority service options available. So they can pay an additional fee of £500 to get a decision typically within 5 working days, or now £1,000 to get a decision within 24 hours. So if you do have a particular urgency, then those options are usually available. The fees are quite complicated, and they vary significantly depending on how long you are sponsoring a worker for, and also whether they get certain discounts, for example, if they're on a shortage occupation list. So you do have to work those out on a bit of a case-by-case basis. And in terms, the only other thing I'd say is that obviously these are estimates. These are the service standard times that the Home Office publish. But if there is, for example, something a bit more complex about an application, then it is possible that they could take a bit longer. So that's what they usually are, but they're not 100% guaranteed.
Okay, thank you. Kate, can you talk us through in a little bit more detail the types of jobs that can be covered under a skilled worker visa?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not possible to sponsor absolutely anyone to do absolutely any role. There is a minimum skills threshold in place. However, further to Brexit, the minimum skills threshold was reduced quite significantly from historically broadly degree level roles to now broadly A-level roles. And what that's meant in practice is a vast number of additional types of job are now eligible for sponsorship. I mean, for example, you can now even sponsor bricklayers or plumbers or plasterers in the UK. So you'd be surprised actually that how many roles are now eligible. And then what happens is all of the roles are listed in what's called a standard occupational standard occupational codes. And you sort of map the role to the applicable code, and that's where you find the minimum salary requirements. And all of the list of the codes are within the immigration rules, and separately there is also what's called a shortage occupation list. So if you're looking at your role, you find the most applicable job code, SOC code, and then you can cross-refer to the shortage occupation list. And if it's on there, then it means reduced fees, as Lydia touched upon, a reduced application fee, but also reduced minimum salary threshold. In terms of, so that's the sort of skills threshold. There is also a minimum salary threshold involved with sponsorship, and the salary is listed, detailed on the certificate of sponsorship. And then it's considered quite a serious compliance breach if a sponsor then does not pay the migrant as per the figure on their certificate of sponsorship. So there is an overall salary threshold for skilled worker, which was reduced further to the other changes they made after Brexit. So it's currently £26,200. but it also no less than 10.75 per hour. So that's to protect, workers, say they're being paid the overall limit, but then having to work very long weekly hours. So, and then finally, we need to look at what the going rate for the role is. And it needs to meet the highest of those three. So the going rate will be listed in the job code, and then you'll need to work out, based on the role, based on the job code, exactly what the minimum is. And also the job codes are all based on a 37.5 hour week. So obviously you need to look at your own weekly contractual hours and pro rata, say based on so you need to work out the hourly rate, and then if it's a 40-hour week that your company or your clients operate with, you would sort of times the hourly rate by 40 times 52, and really need to make careful attention that they're going to pay the minimum as per the overall category, but also the job code. And then, just finally, as I said, shortage occupation roles have a lower salary, so it's always definitely worth checking once you've sort of got the job code that's most appropriate for the role in question, then cross-referring to see if it is on the shortage occupation list. And then there's also lower salary thresholds for what's called new entrants, and that's sort of, as you would imagine, new entrants to the immigration, sort of UK immigration, they're aged under 26, but also students in the UK that are switching into the skilled worker route benefit from lower salary thresholds.
Okay, thank you. So we've covered the process of applying for a sponsor license. We've covered the process of applying for a skilled worker visa. Lydia, are there any kind of other ongoing obligations for the company who holds a sponsor license to kind of manage that?
Yes, there are.
Of course there are.
So the approach that the Home Office take is that, in their view, the main beneficiaries of skilled worker visas and sponsorship are the employers, and therefore they require the employers to take their share of the burden, if you like, of maintaining the system. They also take what we call a light trigger approach to revocation. So they do take the obligations quite seriously. The key obligations that you have as a sponsor, some of these things that you'll be doing anyway. So you're expected to comply with wider UK law. So that would be, for example, the national minimum wage, working time regulations, things like that. You're required to not behave in a manner that is not conducive to the public good. So that means, for example, not engaging in discriminatory behaviour. That might be a good example. You need to essentially not be abusing the system. So you need to make sure that you're only assigning certificates to workers who are suitable for the role, who you've assessed as having the necessary skills and abilities for the role, and also to fill genuine vacancies. So you're not, for example, creating a vacancy purely for the purpose of getting someone a visa. Obviously, that's not permitted. Yeah. You also have some sort of ongoing bureaucratic obligations to report certain things that might happen, and also to retain and record certain documents and information. So, for example, for reporting duties, obviously, if a sponsored worker were to leave your employment, you would need to let the Home Office know that. You also have to report things like if their job title changes, or if the location where they work changes, for example. All of those things you need to report, usually within 10 working days. In some cases, if a worker's job duties change significantly, Kate was talking earlier that about how you have to identify the relevant standard occupation code, and if their job changes a lot, sometimes if they receive a significant promotion, that can mean that their job actually moves into a different standard occupation code. If that happens, you will need to, if you discover it does move into a different standard occupation code, you actually may need to assign them a new certificate of sponsorship, and they might need to get a new visa before they can start the role. So that's one thing to be aware of. There are also some changes relating to the organisation itself that you might need to report. So, for example, if the organisation moves to new premises, you might need to report that, for example. If you're involved in a merger and acquisition, a takeover, if you are involved in sort of TUPE transfers of workers, often that can mean that you need to report that, and there are often other steps that you may need to take. If that does happen, you're involved in one of those circumstances, I would strongly advise people take legal advice, because it gets quite complicated at that point. In terms of record keeping, a lot of things you will be retaining anyway. So for example, obviously you need to make sure that you've got everyone's right to work checks, evidence that you're paying them the right amount, which you would typically be retaining for HMRC and other purposes anyway. You also need to retain evidence that the workers are suitable. So there's some quite specific evidence that you may have to retain if you're running a sort of job advertising and recruitment process that way. The dreaded resident labour market test that people may remember from the past has happily gone, but you do still need to be retaining some evidence of how you are selecting workers, and in some cases it's quite specific. In terms of making those reports, only a level 1 user will be able to log in to do that. We do act as level 1 users for a number of our clients, so we can do that if for those organisations, but obviously we do need to let them know that something has happened that needs to be reporting for us to be able to do that. We often hear from people who realise belatedly that maybe there's something that they should have reported and either they weren't aware or it slipped their mind. It's always better to report late rather than to not report at all. Again, might be worth if you've got a particular number of late reports, it may be worth seeking advice before you do that. If you are consistently breaching your sponsor obligations, that can lead to your licence being either downgraded or more normally just revoked. It is sometimes possible to challenge those decisions. It's not impossible, but it can be difficult to do if there are good grounds for revoking the licence, and ignorance is no excuse. It's no use saying, oh, I didn't know these were my obligations. You're expected to know. So it is important to be aware that you have them, and if there's anything you're not sure about, seek help with that. If your licence is revoked, then any of your sponsored workers will have to stop employing them, and they will have their leave curtailed to 60 days.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so to summarise, we've dealt with how companies first need to apply for a sponsor licence. We've spoken about the process of applying for a skilled worker visa, and then there are ongoing obligations once they've got that sponsor licence. Kate, is there anything else that you'd like to mention?
Well, I guess just how this is all monitored by the Home Office is by way of an audit. So it's open for the Home Office to visit a sponsor licence holder at any time, and that visit can be announced or unannounced. If they've got serious concerns, it could very well be unannounced. Also, they're moving increasingly to desk-based audits, so a key contact authorising officer could receive a request for certain information at any time. So I think what a sponsor licence holder needs to do is really sort of keep up to date with the immigration rules, keep up to date with any training, and really sort of what we say, be sort of audit ready at all times, and really take those compliance duties seriously. One thing that will certainly be checked at an audit is that correct right to work checks are being done, and that's across all employees and not just sponsored migrants. A key part of holding a licence is ensuring that you are proactively preventing illegal working by taking compliant right to work checks, and obviously not employing anyone that doesn't have the right to work.
Okay, that's great. So we may have lots of people watching this thinking, yeah, this sounds like a viable option for us. If you could give them kind of one piece of advice when they're starting that journey, what would it be?
Well, I mean, certainly with our help, it can be a straightforward and an easy process. I mean, one thing that the minimum salaries can go up with or without, with some notice, but I think with legal assistance, just being made aware of changes in advance, I think it is a relatively straightforward process. So I would certainly encourage anyone who's thinking about or any of your clients who are thinking about getting a sponsor license to do it. And as I said, over 80,000 on the list of companies and growing by the day.
Okay, thank you. Lydia?
Yeah, I mean, I agree that it's quite doable with legal assistance. I think that it is important to have at least one and ideally a couple of people in the business who do just take ownership for it a bit and make sure that they are that they do have some awareness of the ongoing obligations. We aim to work very much in partnership with our clients. So, you know, if they don't necessarily have to know every single bit of the sponsor guidance, there's quite a lot of it, but it's helpful for them to know enough so that when they know there's something we need to do here, they can get in touch with us and we can work through it with them.
Okay, thanks. Lydia, I know you've worked with a lot of kind of HR consultants and HR professionals in the past. Can you talk us through kind of how you've helped them?
So yeah, I work with quite a lot of, in terms of working with HR consultants specifically, I've got a few different HR consultants who I work with on quite a regular basis. Where a company is using a consultant in particular for their HR services, I'm quite happy to work again in a sort of three-way partnership with them. Inevitably, a lot of the information and documents and stuff that we need may in that scenario come from the HR consultant as well as from the business. So we're quite happy to work with whoever is required really to get the information and provide the advice that's required. Okay.
And finally, this is the last question, you'll be pleased to hear, but kind of Kate, what do you think is the importance of having kind of legal support when applying for a sponsor licence and the ongoing obligations?
I just think it provides the assurance and comfort that it's going to go right. There's not going to be any issues. It's what we specialise in. We ensure that the process is seamless and without issues. As I said, you know, things can change without notice. Minimum salaries can go up. You know, things can change, and obviously this is what we do on a day-to-day basis. This is all we do. Fully appreciate that everyone joining us today has, you know, other roles, busy roles. So you could just take the pressure and the worry, and the applicant themselves often might be moving countries with the family. You know, it's a stressful process for the applicant as well. So, you know, we just make sure that there are no problems and that everything goes through smoothly.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, thank you, Kate and Lynn. It's been really useful. I've got a lot out of it, and hopefully people watching have too. I can see that we've got kind of quite a few questions come through, which is great to see. We will try and work through as many as we can in the time available. If they are too detailed, it may be better for us to have a kind of one-to-one consultation with you. We're more than happy to arrange that. But yeah, let's have a look at those questions and see what we've got. Okay. First person's asking, do we need to make any changes if we increase our workers' salary, e.g. annual salary increases?
No, straightforward answer. Annual salary increases are perfectly fine and they don't need to be reported.
Okay, very simple. Okay. Can we make salary adjustments when workers are on long-term leave, for example, maternity leave?
So, whenever there's a reduction in salary, as a starting point, a little bit of a red flag. So we need to work out why there is a proposed reduction in salary. The Home Office, as I said, take very seriously that the migrant is paid as per their cause. Any reduction does need to be reported. If it's sort of someone moving from a 5-day week to a 4-day week and the salary is going down, the key red flag is to make sure they still meet the overall threshold for the role and the job code. So that is something that, you know, so reduction salary straight away, right, we need to look at it more closely. But reductions for reasons such as maternity leave, paternity leave, long-term sick leave are permissible. Okay. Yes, they need to be reported, but certainly that they are permissible reasons for reduction in salary.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Question here about whether students should switch to a graduate visa or whether they should be sponsored.
Okay, so ultimately, it's up to you. One thing to be aware of is that when you sponsor a worker, in some cases you have to pay a fee called the immigration skills charge, and you pay that when you assign their certificate of sponsorship. If you have an existing employee who you want to sponsor, and you want to sponsor, and they are still on their student visa, then if they switch into the skilled worker visa, they are exempt from the immigration skills charge. If they go onto their graduate visa, obviously it has the benefit that for the time they're on that visa, they don't have to be sponsored. But when they switch from a graduate visa to a skilled worker visa, you do have to pay the immigration skills charge. So it can save the sponsor a fair chunk of money if you're going to sponsor them straight from their student visa, rather than letting them spend 2 years on a graduate visa and then having to pay that immigration skills charge.
Okay.
For a medium or large employer at the moment, the immigration skills charge is £1,000 a year.
Okay.
So
okay.
For that can be quite a saving.
Okay, thank you. I think we've touched on this a little bit when we were talking about the limits about who can apply for a sponsor license and how long it takes. But someone's asking, is there a limit on how long a company must have been trading before applying for a license?
There's no limit on how short a period a company necessarily needs to be trading. You do need to be established and trading, and you do need to be in a position to provide the mandatory documents. But beyond that, the Home Office does have provisions within their guidance to allow startups to apply. So if you are a relatively new business, that in and of itself is not a bar to you applying for a license.
Okay, thank you. Someone else is asking, can workers switch from a visitor visa to a work visa, or do they need to apply from outside the UK?
Straight answer to that is no. You can't switch from visit status to any other immigration status in the UK. So yeah, they would need to go to return to their home country to make the application.
Okay. Can you briefly explain what the limitations are on people who are here on a visitor visa, what they can and can't do?
Yeah. There are certain sort of subcategories within. There's sort of general visitor, which tourism, visiting family and friends, or business, coming to the UK for business visits, and where someone is in the UK for a business visit, the starting point is that no work is permitted as a business visitor. No payment from the UK company is also permitted, except for sort of minimum payments for meals or travel. So those are the sort of key points to bear in mind about the visit rules.
Okay, thank you. Just check if there's anything else that's coming in. Okay, someone's asking, who can be a level 1 user?
So the first level 1 user on the license is a bit of a technical point, but I did touch on it earlier, needs to be a settled worker and also an employee of the sponsor who's applying for the license. So, but once the license is up and running, any employee or office holder of the sponsor can be a level 1 user, but then separately a legal advisor can be a level 1 user, and then finally, if a company's HR is outsourced, then that HR consultant is also able to be a level 1 user.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Someone else is asking, can you talk us through the challenges a new business would face in securing a license, beyond the point you've already mentioned about setting up a bank account, which causes potential delays? Is there anything else that you kind of come across that it's a bit of a hurdle that people have to come over?
I think primarily, I suspect that if a business is very, very newly set up, that may be one factor that may cause the Home Office to look at their application more closely, and possibly may prompt or make it slightly more likely for you to get a compliance visit. So I think in those circumstances, a key thing would be to make sure that you're really ready for that visit, just in case it happens.
Perfect, thank you. We've had a few questions regarding companies with entities in multiple countries. Can you briefly give us the benefits of the global business mobility routes?
So for the senior specialist worker, which is the one that we've covered here primarily, I think it used to be a lot more beneficial because back when there was a resident labour market test, the resident labour market test did not apply to intercompany transfers. So that's no longer such a benefit because the very strict resident labour market test has gone. I think one of the key benefits for the global mobility senior specialist worker is the fact that if you have particularly workers who are either unwilling or are struggling to pass the English language test, they don't need to pass that in order to get their visa. So that can be one significant benefit of it, I think.
Okay, thank you. People are asking, can workers work remotely at the site of our clients? How does this affect our monitoring obligations?
It starts getting quite complicated, I think, when you're looking at people working remotely. The first thing to be aware of is that you're not allowed to use a sponsor license to effectively act as a recruitment agency to supply people who are employed by you as labour to another organisation. Where you've got clients, where you've got someone working on a client site, perhaps on a particular project, you need to be aware that if the Home Office were to want to come and speak to that worker, they may turn up at your client's site, and there is a requirement that they will be permitted to come onto the site in order to speak to your worker. So you need to make sure that you've got agreement with the client beforehand that they're going to permit that. And if they don't, then that is considered the responsibility for you as a sponsor. You shouldn't also be having your sponsored workers working permanently on a client site. It's one thing having them there for a specific project,
okay,
but not on a permanent basis.
Okay, thanks. So there's people sat watching this thinking, yeah, quite interested, but I want to kind of get an opinion from Kate or Lydia or anybody else in the business immigration team here. What's involved in the initial kind of consultation? What do we do there?
So on an initial consultation, we would set up a telephone conversation with you. Typically that would take about half an hour. And really it's about having a discussion with you to understand what it is that you need the license for, who it is that you're thinking of sponsoring, what sort of roles you're looking to sponsor, and also for us to gather some information about your business, like how long you've been trading and what sector you're in, things like that, so that we can get a picture as to whether we think this is a good option for you, and to give you an idea of things like how long it's going to take and what we think your prospects of success are. You know, so sometimes we do speak to a business, and if we do think this isn't the sensible path for you, or sometimes it's not necessary. Sometimes they have someone who actually there's another option that's better for them, and those are sorts of things that we try and cover at an initial consultation, so that we can then go on to realistically advise you on prospects and how long it's going to take, things like that.
Okay, so we've still got a few more kind of questions kind of coming through, but is there anything else that you want to kind of say that we may have I've not asked you a question about during this webinar that kind of think, yeah, it's a burning point I need to discuss?
Oh, there's lots to discuss. I think we got a little bit technical on the job codes and the sort of salary and the minimum hourly rates. I think that's the sort of key benefit that we can offer is sort of make sure, if the salary on offer is not sufficient, an application will just be refused. And then really, just like we've said before, being audit ready. I think we regularly do what we call mock audits for clients. So we would structure the meeting as if it was an audit. We would go through the types of questions that an auditor will ask, and then we'll start to look at the documents. So for example, they'd want to review a list of employees, and then they'd ask at random evidence of right to work check. So that's always a really good thing to do with. We also training ahead of getting the license as well is something that we can offer.
Okay, thank you. Okay, can you talk us through in broad terms the situations where sponsorship would not be required, such as like PBS dependents, any kind of supplementary work? How can companies check that they have the permission to work?
So for all employees, you should always be doing a right to work check before someone commences employment with you. How you do that right to work check varies depending on what immigration status they have. The Home Office do publish guidance and what's called a right to work checklist, which sets out what type of evidence or process you have to go through for different types of workers. If you have an employee who is on the living in the UK but who is not British or settled, in most cases now they will have a little pink card called a biometric residence permit. A biometric residence permit is no longer a valid right to work document. The employee has to use their BRP number to give you a share code, and you can then use that share code to check their right to work online.
Okay.
And that will tell you whether they've got what permission they have to work and whether they are able to work for you.
Okay. So can you talk us in a bit more detail about what the processes are where sponsorship can be kind of revoked? So like kind of poor performance or something like that?
So if the Home Office have any concerns about the way you're operating your sponsor license, if there's any sort of red flags, they, as Kate said, they can come and do an audit at your premises. Sometimes, in fact, often, if they have concerns about the organisation, that visit can be unannounced. So they'll just come and knock on the door one day and ask to speak to you. They would typically want to speak to your authorising officer, possibly to your level 1 users and key contact. They're going to ask to look at paperwork that you've got to make sure that you're keeping the records that you're supposed to be keeping. They would always check that you've done some right to work checks, things like that. They will also very often want to interview your sponsored workers. So they'll sit down with them to speak to them to make sure that things like they're being paid correctly and that the duties that they're doing in reality match what's on their certificate of sponsorship.
Okay. So what about poor performance from the individual on the skilled worker visa? What happens if it doesn't work out? It's sad, but it does happen.
Yeah, so I mean that's obviously employment advice needs to be taken to follow the sort of fair person dismissal process, but from a purely immigration perspective, I mean, yes, that can happen, and from as I say, just purely from an immigration perspective, when sponsorship ends early, that's one of the reporting requirements that Lydia ran through earlier. So you would need to update the Home Office that sponsorship has ended, and then the individual will be contacted and the remainder of their visa will be curtailed to 60 days. But once you've made that report and they've finished employment with you, your responsibilities end.
Okay, that's great. Okay. So, okay, see if anything else is coming through. So yeah, just kind of reiterate the process that we've gone through today. We've looked at the sponsor license application, we've looked at the skilled worker application, and we've looked at the obligations on companies when they have a sponsor license. And we started to kind of look at kind of hints and tips about how to kind of make best use of that. So anything else that we need to cover?
I think that's a really good summary to without getting overtly technical. I think that's certainly covered everything.
Probably wouldn't overburden people with vast amounts more information, but yeah, if you do have questions about it, you're thinking that this is a process that you might want to go through, feel free to book a free consultation with us. We can chat through it with you, make sure that it's the best thing to do, and then discuss the different ways that we can help you through it. We aim to make our services quite flexible to fit the needs of different organisations, so we can discuss those with you and work out what would be a good plan for you.
Okay, that's great, thank you. So we'll call it a day there, I think. as I said before, we will be sending out copies of the slides that give a kind of little bit more detail than what we've spoken about as well. We'll send out a copy of the recording so you can forward it on to anybody else you think may be interested in what we've had to talk about today. And as I said, I would honestly recommend you have a chat with these guys if you've got anything that you want to know. That's what we're here for. So yeah, anything for me to say is thank you for your time.
Thank you
Thanks
very
very
much.
much.
Thank you.